Guys. So this is going to be presentation 2 in the last module of number 5. And we're going to be talking a little bit about models of practice and frames of reference. I'm not going to get too much into the details here, as this is something that we're going to continue to build upon during your time in the OT division. But this is just going to give you a little preview, if you want to say, to what we mean when we talk about models of practice and frames of reference. Please be sure to complete the readings. I believe there's 5 chapters, and it's in the O'Brien text, the Intro to OT book. It's going to elaborate much more on all of these issues that we're going to be talking about in this module. So the relationship between theories and models of occupation, theories, occupation, and models of practice and frames of reference, is really like an umbrella. I think this analogy fits very nice. So when we talk about frames of reference, this is really the foundation that holds the models of practice and that allows for occupation to happen. So we here are talking about 3 different theories that fall into the frames of reference, or these are models of practice, I guess, if you want to say. And this looks at the model of human occupation, person, environment, occupation, and performance, Canadian model of occupational performance, occupational adaptation, and there are many more. This is just a few of them. And then you have occupation. So when you use a certain theory and you have a good frame or foundation about what those theories are based upon, then occupation is able to occur. When we talk about all the other ancillary foundations and ancillary philosophies, that also contributes to the use of occupation. So biology, sociology, kinesiology, psychology, medicine, all of that really helps us to engage in those areas of occupation. So these are key terms. I want to make sure that you understand these key terms. These are right out of your O'Brien text, so I'm not tricking you or causing you to be worried about having any being misconstrued about what these definitions are. But you will need to know these definitions because they will be on Module 5's examination. So when we talk about models of practice, this organizes our thoughts and our practices. So that's basically what it is. If we're talking about model of human occupation, what is it that we're thinking about? We're thinking about how a person engages in their occupation and how it changes and alters their occupation dependent upon what interventions we use. Frames of reference guides our interventions. A theory is a set of ideas that helps explain or define things that we do. There's 2 components. They're the concepts and the principles. We're going to talk about that more in a couple more minutes too. Concepts are those ideas that represent the thoughts and ideas of an individual, and then principles explain that relationship between 2 or more of those concepts. So again, thinking about 2 or more of the concepts of that individual themselves, that's what we're talking about with the principle. Okay, so theories and frames of reference are very much like a roadmap. So think about, get your GPS out and say that you want to go to Watkins Glen International Speedway. How are you going to get there? You're going to type it into your GPS and you're going to hit start from where I'm at, and it's going to give you that path to get there. You're going to go around obstacles, you're going to go over bridges, you're going to go around landmarks. That's essentially the same thing that we're talking about when we're talking about theories and frames of reference. It helps guide us to get us to that end point. So if we're working with an individual and they've had a total hip replacement, what are the theories that we're going to use, and what is the frame of reference that we're going to use to guide our intervention? Knowing that the ultimate destination is for that person to be independent within their areas of occupation. So again, this is the roadmap that gets us to our endpoint. So models of practice, there's a few of them that we're going to talk about here. There's many more out there. These are just 4 that are pretty common. One is the model of human occupation, Another one is the Canadian Model of Occupational Performance. PEO, this is Person, Environment, and Occupational Performance. And then OA is Occupational Adaptation. These are things, like I said, these models of practice are very commonly talked about in our OT curriculum. And if you look at one of the constants between all of these, is it's focused on occupation. This is where it's occupational therapist's unique perspective again, right? So we're thinking about occupation as the premise of everything that we revolve around. So when we talk about model of human occupation, it has 4 different components. This was developed by Dr. Gary Kielhofner, who unfortunately has passed away. He's a very brilliant man, and if you Google him, you'll find that he has just a wealth of knowledge on the concept of model of human occupation. It's well supported in evidence in its use and its practice, and it really views occupational performance looking at volition, habituation, environment, and performance capacity. What else does that sound like? Our values, our beliefs, right? It kind of goes back to that OT practice framework. The OT practice framework really, I believe, this component of that client factors really comes from that model of human occupation. So when we look at volition, it looks at personal causation, values, and interest. Again, what's important to the patient or individual? What do they value? Then it looks at habituation, which are the roles and routines that they use throughout their day. Environment looks at the spatial as well as the social environment. And then the performance skills looks at the processing, communication, and motor skills. This, in a nutshell, is looking at client factors, performance patterns, and performance skills. And I hope that you see the correlation between all of that. When we look at the COPM, this is a Canadian Model of Occupational Performance. This is a relationship between spirituality, environment, occupation, and the person's occupational performance. The core here, as you see in this picture, is spirituality. So again, this drives an individual. What is their affect? What is their physical experiences? And what are their cognitive experiences? That's all part of the person. Then when you get into leisure, productivity, and self-care, this looks at the occupation. And then the environment looks at all those aspects from the physical, institutional, cultural, and social context and environment and how it plays a part on that person's occupation and within themselves. Again, I hope you're starting to see some of those terms from the occupational or the OT practice framework come to a head in this area as well. PEO is defined by the interactive nature between the person, the environment, and the occupation. So basically, I like this little pictorial graph. Is it kind of, if you think about 3 cogs that go together, and you've probably ever used one of these maybe when you were playing with a child. You have these 3 cogs or these 3 links that go together. As one turns, the 2 others turn, okay? They're dependent on one another. That's what the PEOP is like. So it takes the person, which looks at the conscious, okay? So this has the mind, the body, and the heart, okay? And this bakes up the being of the individual. Then you get into the occupation. Well, actually, let's go to the environment. The environment. What else is within the living component, as you see it has being and living, that impacts that person? So how does their family, their cultural, their social life, technology, political, environment, any of that stuff, how does that impact that person's being, really, that person's sense of consciousness, okay? Or what they think or what they do. Then you get into the occupation. This is the actual component of doing. So now, how is that person engaging in those self-care tasks and that productivity, such as work or play, or those leisure skills? And how does the environment alter that? Or how does the environment support their sense of occupation? That's what the PEO model looks at. The last one we're going to talk about is the theory of occupational adaptation. This is OTs often examine the impact and the effect that they have on the clients. in terms of what adaptations need to happen in order for that individual to participate in the occupation that they choose to engage in. It looks at possibly changing the environment, changing the person or what the person does, or changing the task. Obviously, we're not going to change the person. If Billy Bob is engaged in the activity, Billy Bob's still going to be engaged in it. But when you're thinking back on the person, such as mind, the body, and the heart, you're thinking about how this individual sees themselves, sees them engaged within that area of occupation. We're looking at ultimately optimizing the client's occupational performance, and it really focuses on the people, the performance, and the interaction within the task. This is just a little pictorial graph. So again, we have the client or the person, which is in the middle. What is their main goal? It's to adapt. So it wants to, they're going to adapt to something in order to maximize effectiveness. If you look at guiding treatment, they're looking at what do they need to use or choose in order to engage in that activity. So I'm just going to give you a little story. Okay. So using the occupational adaptation in terms of how something engages in something. So my husband and I, we are rehabbing an old building, and in the process, we noticed that the septic tank, or not really, the sewer was kind of backing up, and we were trying to figure out why on earth it was backing up, what was going on. Well, we got looking, and there was actually a stick. It was like maybe a 1x1 stick, but it was about 2.5 feet long, and it was stuck in the I would say that where the sewer comes out, the sewer pipe. And so we were trying to figure out how to get it out of there. And I was coming up with ideas from my OT world. Oh, if I had a reacher, oh, if I had this, we would be able to get it out of there. Well, my husband in his he's very analytical thinking. He said, well, if I take another piece of wood and I put a screw on there and I screw, I screw it in one end and then I put it down in the hole, I can screw it in the other end and pull it out. And we were able to do that. That's what we're talking about with adaptation. Okay. So it's finding a way that is not your typical way of doing something, but adapting it in order for you to get the outcome that is desired. I hope that makes sense. There's many, many more that we can think about, but that's one thing that came to mind. Now, there are also common frames of reference that OTs use, and these are developmental, biomechanical, sensory integration, motor control and motor learning, and NDT. These are pretty common frames of reference. And so what I'm going to do now is this presentation's over, and I'm going to have you, after you've completed your reading, looking at the information about these frames of references, I want you to give me an example of where each of these frames of reference, or actually, let me back up, a scenario in which each of these frame of references might be seen or witnessed in an OT intervention session. Or maybe something that you've even thought about in your life. Maybe it's not something that an OT is using, but you're still using that frame of reference as while providing me a scenario. So that's it for this, and I'll be talking to you soon. Have a good one, guys.